This is Everyday Spirituality with connect.faith. I'm Debbie Bronkema, and I'm here today with Catherine Foley, who is an author and a physical therapist and a wellness coach. And we're really glad that you joined us today. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Debbie.
Everyday Spirituality is a opportunity to really talk to people about their spiritual journey. And I'm excited that Catherine's here to talk about hers, in particularly your work between the body and the spirit, and how you found that to be a blessing in your time. Can you just tell us a little bit about how you got started with physical therapy?
Certainly, in college, I actually began as a business major. And a friend of mine was working with a gentleman who had been injured in an accident and was paralyzed from the chest down. And I started to go with her to help this gentleman, and I was just really awestruck by all the amazing things that he could do. And it really sparked my interest in physical therapy. And so began to do some volunteer work and slowly started taking some sciences in college and kind of letting go of the business work. And I haven't looked back. And I come from a family that we have a lot of medical people in my family. And I think I was originally kind of trying to do something different. And I think going against, nature, what my natural tendency was, as a 20-something-year-old, and I, recognized that I really was, God had intended for me to work in this field and to be a physical therapist. So I just have really enjoyed a lot of unique opportunities as a physical therapist, working in a trauma center at the beginning, and then doing a lot of clinical education in my work. And then after we had children, I began to do a lot of one-on-one work with some neurologically involved patients. And what's been fascinating to me, Debbie, and is just how, you know, 25 years ago, we didn't realize the level of neuroplasticity that our brain has. And neuroplasticity is the ability of our bodies to form new pathways in the brain, be it for motor purposes, be it for psychological purposes. There is so much potential, untapped potential in the brain. And that combined with, the movement of the body that I have worked with for a long time has really kind of taken me to another level of understanding of the body and how we can pair that with our thinking and our spirituality and our connection with something so much larger than us, that only enhances that potential. So it's really been a neat journey. And as with all journeys, it builds upon itself, and there have been just gifts and challenges too along the way. In my early 40s, I turned 50 this year. So about 10 years ago, I dealt with a season where I had severe anxiety and panic disorder, and ultimately was diagnosed with PTSD, stemming from really a multitude of situations. I had really not processed. I had lost 3 children during pregnancies, in my childbearing years. And then a friend of mine passed away suddenly from a cardiac event. And then my husband and I dealt with a lot of unrest in his business. And the culmination and layers of those events that all came fairly close to one another, that I didn't take the time to really process and grieve the losses, had created layers within me. And ultimately, I got to a point where, my mind couldn't really function like it needed to anymore, and thus it affected my body. And that's when the whole cascade of repetitive panic, and I just lived in a state of fight or flight for almost 3 years. And it was very frustrating as a medical professional, because I am one that can look at things and set goals and work towards those goals. And it seemed something that was really out of my control, which, I learned a lot about surrendering to God and really grew in my spirituality tremendously during that season. And, found different resources that could help me to heal. One of the big resources I used was acupuncture. Um, I also relied heavily on a lot of my peer physical therapists that do myofascial work, which is the work that I do. And I was able to ultimately, in time, my body became whole again. And just tremendous, tremendous gratitude for, everyone that kind of came together and helped me, and, and ultimately to God for kind of sealing that healing.
So is that when you began writing and exploring how these things all work together and how they work together to help you?
It was. The writing was really a providential gift. It's kind of, as we look back, everything is so much clearer than when you're walking through it. At the time, my children were really small, and we spent some time down at the coast, off the coast of South Carolina. And my children nudged me they wanted to write this children's book together. And we had always collected books of fun places that we visited, and they noticed that there wasn't a book about this certain island named Seabrook Island that we visited often. And, children, their imaginations, they, believe that all things are possible, which as adults we should too. And we decided, all of these little windows were opening. And this was actually occurring when I was not doing well. And I thought, I wanted to do something with my children because it just was not an easy season. And so decided to embrace it and took some writing classes. And it was something that was totally new to me. And what I've recognized now is that it was God's unique way of opening a door for me to notice in nature again. That's something that I had lost. I really didn't take the time and really ponder all the beauty that is surrounding us all the time. And so that was something new that that kind of came into my life again. And then the writing, looking back, was therapeutic to me. And so I love to hold the pen, and I love to have a nice clean sheet of paper and to just write thoughts. And then so I just began a morning practice of expressive writing. And I recognized how beneficial that was for me in helping to clear the muddiness that was in my mind. And interestingly, now, as I've done a lot more research, I mean, there are countless studies that show how expressive writing is therapeutic in healing. And so I've learned more about that and taken some courses, and I've implemented that into the work that I do. So the workshops that I teach, that's always a part of what we do with the meditation and inspirational things that we do. And then the writing is also a big part of it. So it was kind of an accidental lesson, but one that I'm incredibly grateful for because it's now a big part of my life. And becoming an author was never something I dreamed of doing, but it's been a real gift to me, and hopefully to others as well.
Yeah. I have found that as well, that writing, it makes you present in the moment and kind of slows you down, particularly when you take pen to paper. It really slows you down to be present in a way that we're just often not. So I'm glad to hear that was a big part of your healing. And it's wonderful to hear how your kids impacted your journey in ways that you weren't expecting. That's really great. That's really great. So at this point, do you combine physical therapy with healing in a spiritual way? Obviously in a physical way, but in a spiritual way, does it work that way for you? How do you do that?
If a client is open to, engaging in spiritual discussion and that sort of thing, I absolutely will talk with them about it. I have some long-term clients that I've treated for that are neurologically involved that I've treated for a significant amount of time. And so, we incorporate a lot of that with the breath work that we do. And, I think there's, you just have to, as a medical practitioner, you have to be sensitive to what, people's beliefs are and what their desires are and what their goals are. I also have a well women group that I lead that meets once a month. And we absolutely do, a lot of the writing work. We do a lot of the spiritual work, and we do something called unwinding, which is something that you do within myofascial release. And it's just allowing the body to move into different positions as you feel it needing to move. So often when we finish with the meditation and when we do the breath work, the body, will kind of want to move in a certain direction. And as I instruct people, you really just take the brakes off. And sometimes it's just a subtle movement of rocking back and forth, or maybe your head kind of bobbing, or, it can be any kind of movement. But I encourage people just to take the brakes off and allow that movement to occur. And what happens, it's the body resetting itself. And so it is a physiological component of our cell memory.
Right. Interesting. I've never heard of that before. Unwinding. That sounds fascinating. So, Catherine, could you explain to me a little bit more about what you mean in terms of cell memory?
Yes. So our bodies, we have cellular memory. So in other words, when something occurs and when we process that, it becomes a part of us. And the cellular memory can be, linked to something that was a joyful situation, but it can also be linked to something that the body and an individual may perceive as being traumatic. And so it attaches to that fight or flight response, the cellular memory. So when we talk about unwinding of the body, it's actually a physical rewinding of an event, in other words. So sometimes we detach from an event mentally, but the body still has recollection of it because it may have experienced that fight or flight protective mechanism within the body. And so an unwinding can occur when you just allow the body to move through space as it needs to. And really it is that on a cellular level, the body resetting and ultimately letting go of that cellular memory. And it's not always the specific memory that's coming to mind, but it can be, but it's not always that way.
So sometimes people talk about disassociating certain memories, but maybe your cells still have those memories. Does that make sense? Your body might still be reacting to something that you have long ago put in a box on a shelf somewhere.
Yes, that can absolutely be the case. Not always, but it definitely can be the case. There's a book called The Body Keeps the Score. I don't know if you've ever heard of that book, but it's a great work, and it really validates a lot of what we're sharing today.
Okay, interesting. So then the reset and the unwinding and the reset help your body heal, even if you're not at a point where you're ready to process the emotional piece. Is that right?
Yes, it can. It can. Absolutely. Often you'll find that, you've got to also incorporate the mind component. So whether they heal together or they heal separately, again, is very individualized. Ultimately, if someone's comfortable, they can talk through a lot of it and think through a lot of it. And that ultimately enhances that mind-body connection, which is, what the ultimate desire is. But sometimes it is separate.
Interesting. Interesting. So at this point, where do you see yourself going? Are you continuing to write? Are you seeing yourself doing more wellness work? Or what's your journey about now?
Well, I think both of those things are really, they intersect. The writing for me, I really have to be inspired and have to really have an idea that um, really sticks with me and won't leave me before I really start writing it. I'm always doing some sort of writing, but in terms of formally writing another book, I if something just won't leave me, then I know that I need to start formulating it into a potential idea for a book. But in terms of what I really enjoy, I enjoy teaching. I love workshops, and I love speaking, and encouraging people. And so they really, they kind of go hand in hand. They go hand in hand. Just sharing what I've written, because the whole purpose of writing it is really twofold. I mean, it's helpful for me, maybe on a 10% level, but the 90% desire of mine is that it impact the reader. And that's really what I'd like to do with the writing that I do.
Connecting with people. Yeah, in any way you can.
Absolutely.
It broadens it beyond the people that you can meet in your life to people that find it along the way. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's been my prayer all along, is that, it reaches people that need it at a time they need it, and that it helps them to grow in a special way.
Thank you. Did you have other things that you wanted to share with us today?
I really, the big thing for me is just encouraging people to take time. I know when people hear the word solitude, it has, kind of a pitting feeling in your stomach. It sounds like loneliness, or um, time spent alone that may not be fruitful. But I think that's one of the biggest things I like to encourage people, even people that are very social. Bits of solitude really feed the mind, body, and soul. And I think when we can take time out, to connect with God, um, you know, He's bigger than we are, and He knows a greater plan. And I think that when we can connect in that way, there's just endless potential, and we ultimately become more of who He intended us to be. And so I think, in our busy society today, that's just super important. Um, the book I've written, most recently, is a 40-day journey. It's called Desert to Dawn. And the beginning, we talk a lot about, or I share a lot of the practices with meditation and breath work and progressive relaxation, creating sacred space. All of those practical things are in the beginning of the book. And the second half of the book is actually a 40-day journey where there's a word each day, there's scripture, there's a reflection, a prayer, and then there's a question, to challenge you to ponder and reflect. And I think that, my hope is that people will use this as a resource to grow and be transformed. And there's always, little spaces within us that need transformation. No matter how spiritual you are, no matter how connected with God you are, there's always space to grow. And so I hope that people will use, this journey for that.
Wonderful. Thank you. That sounds like a great recommendation. Your timing is good too, because this will be coming out during Lent. So that's a time when a lot of people do stop and do some spiritual reflection. So if people want to know more about you and your work, where can they find?
Well, I have a website. It's www.catherinegoodmanfarley.com. And I also, am active on Instagram Sometimes, not a ton, but I do some, writing and encouragement on Instagram, and you can also find out, if I'm going to be doing a workshop, which I have done a couple of virtual ones, which is nice, to be able to reach people that are not, right in your community, and people that are local in the Charlotte, North Carolina area. I do live workshops there, and those are really the two spots. I do have a Facebook page as well. That's Catherine Goodman Farley. So um, I just would encourage anyone to reach out to me. And if you have questions or thoughts, again, as you mentioned earlier, Debbie, it's connection is wonderful.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Well, this has been Everyday Spirituality with connect.faith. We've been glad to welcome Catherine today. And if you'd like to invite one of your friends to listen, please go ahead and share. You can subscribe to us in all the places you find your podcasts. Thank you so much for being with us, Catherine.
Thank you, Debbie.